Okay, guys.
All right, everyone. We are ready for our final presentation. Tarbut, Torah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are calling the case of the self-driving car to order. First, we will hear a statement from the plaintiff.
Hello, my name is Simone Shalom, and I'm here before you today to gain compensation for the damage done to my car, medical expenses, my time off of work as a result of the accident with Mrs. Rubenstein's vehicle.
Can we please hear a retelling of the case, of the details of this case?
On a hot day in the month of Av, I was driving peacefully. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. Mrs. Rubenstein's car, driving in the opposite lane, T-boned my car. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. There, I was unable to go to work, and I had used up all my sick days. Eventually, my company started to deduct from my income. This is why I asked for this case to be held. I can't pay these expenses, and I want the justice that Hashem deems right.
Thank you for that statement, Mr. Shalom. We will now hear Mrs. Rubenstein's defense.
I know that my car hurt Mr. Shalom's, and I'm really sorry about that, but I don't see how you can blame this on me. My car is self-driving, and it is legal for me to listen to podcasts while driving, which is what I was doing. It isn't my fault the car avoided the pedestrian, hitting Mr. Shalom's car instead. If you want to sue anyone for what happened, sue the car company.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rubenstein. Now that we have heard the pleas from both sides, we will begin to discuss the case. So first, to reiterate, what we know is that Ms. Rubenstein's supposedly self-driving car did damage to Mr. Shalom.
To properly discuss liability, we must first determine what type of damager this car falls under. In Bava Kama 1.1, it says, there are 4 categories of damages: the ox, the pit, the mava, and the fire. I can already tell that this car isn't a pit, because in this situation it caused damage through movement, which isn't an aspect that pits have.
I will agree with you there, but before we move on, can we define what a mave is?
Yeah, well, according to Bava Kama 3.2, a mava is a living damager who destroys with its teeth, making the damager under the category of shen. It says the nature of shen is where there is gratification derived by the animal from its damage.
Okay, in that case, we should eliminate the option of mave because the car can't feel gratification. In this case, it means that it would have to hit Mr. Shalom's car to satisfy itself. However, there is one type of damage that we haven't discussed at all up until this point.
What would that be?
Adam Hamazik, which is the person himself who does the damage. Mrs. Rubenstein could have overridden the self-driving feature in order to prevent its crash. The fact that she didn't do that causes this damage to inherently become her fault.
I just want to interrupt quickly. My car has no manual override option. I simply put in the destination and it takes me there.
Since there is no manual override, we can't say that Ms. Rubenstein caused the damage herself because she couldn't stop this crash from happening. So in this case, the car is the damager and not Ms. Rubenstein. So a Adam Hamazik can't be the type of damage present here.
Okay, that still leaves the options of fire and ox.
Well, the difference between fire and ox is that one is alive and the other isn't. How can we classify the car as being alive?
Since the car is artificial intelligence, can we consider the actions it takes to be thought through? Because in that case, we can classify the car as being ox.
I actually think that the car is fire because to move, Mrs. Rubenstein has to switch it on and enter an address. This action of starting the car separates it from being an ox because an ox wouldn't have to be started to go out and cause damage. On top of this, a fire has known parameters while an ox acts randomly. This car's actions are all set by the parameters of its code, so we know what it will do in any situation. Also, the car has no breath of life. Therefore, it isn't alive and cannot be classified as the ox.
That makes sense. So I also have to agree, and the car has to be considered fire.
In that case, I'll also have to agree. Now, the question we have to ask is who has to pay?
Well, the types of damage that fire can inflict are damage done to property and damages done to people.
According to Chachot Niskei Mamon 14:15, when a fire spreads and harms a human being and injures him, that person who kindled the fire is liable for the damages. Unemployment benefits, medical costs, pain, and embarrassment suffered by the injured party.
Okay, but who do we say kindled the fire? Was it Aliva or Miss Rubenstein? Aliva was the company who built the car, but Miss Rubenstein was the one who started the car.
If we compare this situation to making a fire, then Aliva would be the person who brought together the wooden sticks, while Ms. Rubenstein is the one who took over the pile and then ignited with the spark. Hilchot Nizkei Mamon 14:7 actually goes over the situation, saying that when one person brings the wood and then another person brings a flame, and a fire is started which causes damage, the person who brought the flame is liable. From this we have to say that Ms. Rubenstein is responsible for the fire, and because of this she has to pay.
I will agree that Aliva isn't liable for this situation, but I also don't think that Mrs. Rubenstein can be held responsible because if we recall from earlier, there's no manual override.
Yes, but even so, Miss Rubenstein did start the car, so she is responsible for the damage it causes.
I'll agree that Ms. Rubenstein is responsible for the creation of the fire, but what we haven't considered is the fact that the jaywalker caused this accident by jumping in front of the car.
That sounds similar to the idea of a fire being blown by an unusual wind from Bava Kama 27.2 and Bava Kama 56.1 by Rashi and Miri. We also know that an unusual wind causes the fire to do damage that it wouldn't have done or been able to do under normal conditions. They also tell us that an unusual wind cannot be expected by the kindler of the fire. This is similar to the jaywalker because the jaywalker couldn't have been expected by Mrs. Rubenstein, and if he hadn't been entered the intersection, the car wouldn't have done the damage it did. Due to this, we are classifying the jaywalker as an unusual wind, and according to Hilchot Nizkei Mamon 14.7, if a fire is fanned by an uncommon wind, no one is held liable. This fact releases Mrs. Rubenstein from liability even though she kindled the fire.
But then who has to pay? We have to have someone take responsibility for the damages.
After reviewing this case, I think we have to look into Ms. Rubenstein's insurance policy to find the answer.
I have a normal insurance policy on my car that covers all the damage it causes.
If your insurance covers all the damage done directly by the car, then your insurance company is responsible for paying off the damage done to Mr. Shalom's car.
But then who is going to pay for my medical bills and my time off of work?
We will get to that now. I think we have to discuss Hilchot Nizkei Mamon 14.15 because it never discusses an unusual wind. So does that mean when fire damages a person, even if it is an unusual wind, that the person who kindled the fire has to pay?
No, because in this situation, Ms. Rubenstein has no control over the car, and according to Bava Kama 28.2 through 29.1, one is liable to pay even if the damage was unavoidable. For the sages say, he isn't liable to pay for their damage under the laws of man, but under the laws of heaven. From this we derive that Ms. Rubenstein isn't obligated to pay for Mr. Shalom's additional damages. However, morally, Ms. Rubenstein should consider paying it.
So essentially, as the Beit Din, we can't demand that she pays for Mr. Shalom's additional damages, but morally and being obligated under the law of heaven, she should contribute to the payment.
Okay, finally, let's discuss liability and decide whether or not Aliva must change their coding in their car.
I believe that Aliva shouldn't change their programming. This is because their code is in accordance with Pikuach Nefesh, which is the responsibility of each person to save a life at almost all costs. The programming in the self-driving car makes its decisions with the goal of minimizing casualties in every scenario, which is why the car hit Mr. Shalom instead of the jaywalker.
Since Pikuach Nefesh trumps any other consideration for changing the code, I will have to agree that we mustn't change the car's coding.
Okay, Mr. Shalom, Ms. Rubenstein, the Beit Din of Tarbut Torah has come to the decision on this case. We have concluded that Ms. Rubenstein insurance is liable to pay for damages done to the car, and while as the Beit Din we can't demand Ms. Rubenstein to pay for Mr. Shalom's time off from work, we highly advocate that she does to morally and to be in accordance with the laws of heaven. Lastly, Aliva shouldn't change the programming in their self-driving car. Yes? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. This case is dismissed. Shavuot Tov to everyone.
So you have to add my questions for presentation. But I'll find a question.
Go Brewers.
Okay, yeah, I have one question. Okay, so the idea of the unusual wind, great. I like the way you guys went through that, but let me ask you a question. Didn't the car expect a jaywalker because the car is actually programmed already to avoid collisions? So can't you assume that perhaps the car is actually programmed to expect collisions because it's programmed to avoid certain collisions?
Well, actually, according to the extra questions and responses we got from about the car, we learned that the car's programming tells it to save life and minimize all casualties at all costs. So when it's avoiding the jaywalker, it's not particularly knowing that there's going to be a jaywalker out there. It just knows that if it hits it full force with the speed that was going, it would kill the jaywalker. Whereas if it hit Mr. Shalom's car, there was a much less risk of killing the person in the car because they were protected by the car as well.
It also says in the case that the pedestrian came out of nowhere, which didn't give the car time to see something coming. It just kind of poofed and was there,
Right.
and the car had to react.
Right, so I guess, like, again, the question is, isn't the car programmed to expect that something's going to happen because it has a programming to avoid certain situations?
Well, what I believe that the car, like in terms of programming, I feel like it'll use artificial intelligence where it'll take every situation and it'll learn from that situation. And so in this case right here, the car will actually learn, okay, if there is a pedestrian here, there's a jaywalker, or whoever it may be, it'll learn, okay, within this nanosecond decision, which course of action to take. And really it does become in accordance with Pikuach Nefesh, which is one of the highest, if not the highest, thing that we should be in accordance with. And so the fact that it hit Mr. Shalom's car, it can also calculate whether or not what type of force it will hit, and that's why it also swirled, because it will be less force. And so that's
But I think what we're all trying to tell you is just that the car is not expecting that the jaywalker will be there, it's just reacting very quickly.
Okay, excellent.
Okay. So that's why because it's known to plan for obstacles that it's not necessarily,
Right.
because like we could argue that might be a usual win, like as some of your.
Right, because in the case description, we were told that there were two witnesses on the side, and they both said that the jaywalker appeared out of nowhere. So we can only imagine that this jaywalker just appeared in the road all of a sudden, and that it was not an expected coincidence because it's oncoming traffic.
That's the way you just clarified that it's not an expectation, it's a reaction, was a solid clarification. Appreciate it.
Give me a little more on this conclusion about the morally Ms. Rubenstein should pay some of the other damages. So just enhance me a bit more with your source.
In Judaism, there's basically, generalizing it, there's two laws of man, where we follow to like the letter and what the rabbis say, and laws of heaven. And that's where if you're not like doing teshuvah, or if you're not following it, you will pay in the afterlife, and you'll pay in Gehenna, or you'll pay in Gan Eden, wherever it may be. And so if Ms. Rubin, according to the laws of heaven, she is technically still responsible, just because a person's always warned. So it doesn't matter, and that we learn in Bava Kama 5 or 6. You can try, I don't know. And so if she wants to be in accordance with the laws of heaven and pay now versus pay later, right? It's kind of like that insurance policy. You pay now and you get better later. That's why she should ethically and morally pay. But we can't make her, because according to the laws of man, she's not guilty. She's not liable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the teams, and shukra to all of you for some wonderful teaching and presentations. Thank you so much to our judges. We appreciate all of your contribution and thought. That concludes the competition portion for our group. I believe I'm going to check. I believe that at this point we should be going downstairs, and at some point there will be lunch downstairs. The judges will go and deliberate, and then it is now about 11 o'clock, and at 12:30 the closing ceremonies will gather downstairs for presentations, awards, and the conclusion of the program. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great experience for them to have you guys think on your feet. They did that so well.